A very good day. My name is Ernest Sigasa, South African Agenda podcast. Today we are with Dr. Theuns Eloff in this pursuance of our agenda laid out before. We are passionate about the love of our country and hence the emphasis on the issue of the patriotism and the development of our country and all its citizens. Thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you very much, Ernest, and thanks for the privilege to be here.
Yes. And before we proceed, we would always plead with the viewers and so on of our podcast to follow us. They find us on YouTube, on Twitter and TikTok. And thank you very much. Let's get on it. Doctor, if we look at your history and the organization that you represent, before we get in there, can you kindly tell us, introduce yourself for the viewers to know who you are?
Thank you, Mr. Sigasa. I was born in the town of Potchefstroom in the present Northwest Province. I went to school there, but in my first year, grade 1, my father was seconded to the then University College of Zululand, and we lived for a year in a small place called Mtunzini in Zululand, and there I went to a double medium school and I learned some English. So my conservative family in Rustenburg were shocked when I could read the Sunday Times at the age of 6. Then we came back to Potchefstroom and I had my school years there. I was a bit younger than my group, so I went to university when I was 16. And I first studied law, and then I changed in my third year after I finished my law degree to theology, and I studied for a Maruti, and I finished only in 1980. Then I went to do my service, national service in the Air Force as a chaplain, and after that I was called to a congregation of the Reformed Church, that's the Dopperkerk, FW de Klerkskerk, in Pretoria at the student congregation. And during that time I joined Van Slabbert and some other Afrikaners who went to Dakar to meet with the ANC in exile. That led to the fact that I left the ministry and I joined an organization called the Consultative Business Movement in 1989. And there I became executive director, and I was also in that capacity one of the facilitators of the peace process and the peace accord, as well as the first CODESA, which then I was the head of the secretariat, and then in the multi-party negotiating process, the one that came after CODESA, I was head of the administration. In that time I was also the deputy secretary or the deputy director of the Transitional Executive Council, about 6 months before we had elections. And after that I came back, and we, CBM then merged with the Urban Foundation to form the National Business Initiative. I was there for 6 years, and in 2002 I became Vice Chancellor of the then Potch University, which in 2 years after that, in 2004, merged with the University of Botswana, or the University of the Northwest, to form the Northwest University, and I was Vice Chancellor until 2014. Then we moved back to Pretoria, my wife and I became involved in a number of trusts around Afrikaans language and culture. I became chairman of Astral Foods, which is the biggest chicken producing company in the country today, and various initiatives like the present. So I've got a wife, obviously, I've got 2 daughters and 3 granddaughters.
Thank you once more, and Doc, thank you very much. It's quite clear that you've got a very accomplished, background. It would take us the whole day if we were to ask so many questions. But whilst we were off air, I remember 1987, as you are referring to about Dakar. That delegation of the Afrikaner community and business people and churches infused some sense of hope. When the meeting in Dakar with the leadership of the ANC at the time. I remember that quite well. But it's quite clear that you have been involved in quite a number of activities that led to the CODESA and so on. if you are to do a comparison based on the developments that took place that led or culminated into the CODESA end, then you look at the current setup, the current juncture of the GNU and so on. What would be your take and what would you want to convey to South Africans?
Well, I think it's clear that the two GNUs differ in the sense that the first one was written into law, into the interim constitution, that any party getting more than 20% of the votes would have a deputy president. The Chief Minister Buthelezi was pulled in by the ANC, was also part of that. And F.W. Clerk became deputy president with Thabo Mbeki. Interesting, today people think we can still have two deputy presidents, but the constitution only makes provision for one. So that wise, I think it's difficult at the moment because there's only one deputy president position. Today's GNU is the outcome of an election where no one got enough to govern. And the ANC, I think, in my view, wisely opted to go the route of a government of national unity with most of what I would call the moderate or left middle parties. The difference is that at that time in 1994, it was demanded and it was in a sense created by the Constitution. Today it's happened, it's not out of the Constitution, but the Constitution doesn't specifically say what should happen. So we see negotiations going on for a long time, but I am positive that it will come to a positive conclusion. There will always be squabbles in the government of national unity, in any coalition. Someone said the other day they don't know whether the marriage of these parties will work, and then someone else said, look, they can fight in-house, but as long as when they come out they must hold hands. And do things together. I think that for me would be the big difference, that now both those times, 94 and 2024, are very critical times in our country's history. And I think looking back, this is perhaps even more critical than 94.
Again, thank you very much. I think it's important from time to time to clarify this matter based on the challenges. Thank you, Doc. These challenges that we have in the country. National groups, we come from the elections and so on. But the question central to all of these things, to ensure that, there's a holding of hands, the love of a country, it would be important to emphasize that throughout our discussion. Like we said from the beginning, podcast, the Agenda South Africa podcast, we want to ensure that in the ultimate analysis, whatever little contribution we're making, but there's harmonization of relations among and within national groups of South Africa, so as to ensure that we hold our country and our flag up high. But interestingly, Doc, coming back again, and thank you very much for your answer, your contribution, the Afrikaner Leadership Network, we know that it includes a number of other organizations, your AfriForum, your Solidarity, and so on. What would you define these groupings, or and their participation, or your network, if I may put it that way?
Let me start by saying, as with many communities, unity in the Afrikaner community was never a big thing. I always make the joke saying the last time Afrikaners stood together was on the ship to Ceylon after the Anglo-Boer War, and they only stood together because there was no seating space. And so in discussions with the Mbeki Foundation a few years back, President Mbeki asked us, what do you believe in and what can you do? And those questions exercised our minds, and we realized that in the variety of Afrikaner organizations, it would not be possible or even desirable to form one new big organization. Perhaps I should just stay back and say that the Solidarity movement has about 22 member organizations, like the Solidarity Trade Union, like AfriForum, like Marula Media, like Academia or Soltech, the technical college, quite a number of those. They would make up, I would think, 70% of organized Afrikaner organizations in the country. And then you have the Afrikaner Bond, the old Broederbond, You have SAI, which is a agricultural organization, the Rapportreiers, which is not part of Solidarity, and then smaller organizations like the Pretoria Afrikaanse Sakekamer. We realized that what we need to do is to, if we can't have an umbrella organization, at least say what we agree on. And so we had almost a 2-year process of meetings to say how to agree, because people come from different views. So the declaration we basically finished in January this year. And we realized now we have a consensus, sufficient consensus, if I can use that word. And obviously there were some compromises, and we spoke long and hard about many things. So this group then, we didn't want to form a new organization, so we just started calling it the Afrikaner Leadership Network. Also, to make provision, there are some people like me who, I'm not head of an Afrikaner organization anywhere. The trusts that I spoke of are about Afrikaans as language, and it includes people who are not white, who are not Afrikaners. And we said we must also make provision for individual leaders to be there. So there are quite a few, but prominent people. And so we realized that we need to do this to be able to tell people like President Mbeki and others, who are we and what can we do? And on the what can we do, it's very clear in the declaration. I think there are 12 points. And in 8 of those, we speak of the need and our desire to help other communities build. Not in a patronizing way, but you know.
In fact, that was going to be my next question. Well, but no, you can proceed.
Yes.
It was interesting.
So basically, we finished this thing. We said, okay, now we've caught the bus. What do we do? And we said, well, we'd like to share this with the rest of the Afrikaner community. We also want to share it with the rest of the country. And we first said we don't want it to be linked to the election, because then it becomes a party political thing, because these organizations who signed this are not political. They're not party political. They vote for a variety of parties. They don't only vote for the Freedom Front Plus, they also don't only vote for the DA or the ACDP. Some of them may have voted for Rise Mzansi, for instance. So we said, okay, perhaps this is an opportune moment. We've got a 30-year of democracy coming, festivity. We think we should do it around that. So that's why we did it on the 20th of April this year. And the reason why we did it, we have 3 objectives. We want the rest of the Afrikaner community to take note. We want the rest of the country to take note, especially the political parties and the government. And then we want also to, by publicizing it, also get support from others who may not have been involved in the declaration and the drafting of it itself. So the content basically I can put in 2 broad themes. The first is we here to stay and to build. So we're not immigrating. We don't have any other country that we can go to. Yes, it is true that there are some Afrikaners who have exercised their right to go to other places, but more or less of the white South Africans, the Afrikaners have stayed in their numbers in the country. And interesting enough, Solidarity tells me that their statistics show that some of them are coming back. I think mainly because it's not, the grass is not that greener in Australia or Canada. And I must say, I will never be able to live in a cold country like Canada or England anyway, but that's another point. So that's the first point, build, stay here and build. The second point is to say, but in order to do that, we want to be recognized as the Constitution warrants. We feel that that's not always done, and especially with regard to our cultural organizations and language. And for that reason, we said that part of that recognition is that we would like to have what we call a cultural accord with the government of the day. Now, we specifically said the government of the day. We didn't know who will be the government after the elections. And obviously we will, if the government of national unity is formed finally, we will want to approach them to say, like, can we talk about this? So that's basically, so there are various other things in there, I think, but I think that it's covered by the 2 themes: stay, build with others, and secondly, recognition through, amongst others, a cultural accord.
Doctor, thank you very much. We're still on the subject, the Southern Agenda podcast. Doc, if I may, with regard to the matter we've just raised, remember that for any progress, any prosperity, depends on the stability of any society. Now, the point I want to raise is, given our historical past where we come from, now, if the Afrikaner community says, no, we want government to recognize, the question is, what about these other groupings? How do you see that? Because that on its own might be a source of conflict or disagreement as well. What's your view?
We say that the Constitution recognizes cultural and cultural groups and the right to organize their own culture. We also have in South Africa a house of traditional leaders. And those traditional leaders are recognized by government. They even get paid by government. Fairly good salaries. And they link to the heritage of those African groups and communities. We're not asking for money, but what we are asking for is that we get the same kind of recognition. That, for instance, perhaps it's bad to, no, it's not proper to compare ourselves with the Zulu king, but at least a measure of that also to the Afrikaner community. And that's not there. What we find is what we perceive is that there's an active campaign in the ANC government, and especially through some of the parts of the government, to go after Afrikaans schools, to try to get them to drop Afrikaans as a language, not to give ourselves a chance to practice our culture and so on. So I would say that we don't ask any more than anything else that we've given in the country. We also don't ask that we be recognized as a political party. We're not a political party. We're a community. We will exercise our South Africanship through political parties and through other means, through civil society. But in terms of culture, heritage, and language, we want the same rights. Now, some people will say to preempt the question, but for instance, isiZulu is not the language of tuition in schools, but you have it. Our answer to that is that there are indications, fortunately now, especially through what Minister Angie Motshekga said, a realization of the importance of mother tongue language also for indigenous languages. And when one of the things that I feel strongly about personally, and also in the trust that I chair, is the need for mother tongue education, because it's not something that Afrikaners thought out. It's an international phenomenon that has been shown through research that unless a country has mother tongue education until grade 8 at least, preferably grade 10, you do your children a disservice. Now, obviously, it's true that in the black community, children who are second or third generation Soweto, who lived in Soweto, they probably can't speak isiZulu anymore. I've had friends who said, my children can't speak to my mother because they don't speak isiZulu anymore, my mother don't speak English. So for those urban children, English is fine, it's now their mother tongue. But for the majority, I would venture to say, of African children, especially in the rural areas, they can't speak English. And they are forced to do English tuition from grade 4, and they are taught by teachers who can't speak English properly. And then why do we have such bad matric results? Because of that. So what we're saying is that we would like to help the government, for instance, the Department of Basic Education, to institute mother tongue education, obviously progressively. It can't be done overnight, but it can be done, to show that we don't ask anything more for ourselves than what we want for other communities.
We were made to understand that you, particularly with your pledge or declaration, approached government, and you did not derive any pleasure, but immediately after the elections, you were called in. And can you confirm that?
Look, when this came out at the end of April, there were 3 three type of responses. The one that gave me huge encouragement is that City Press carried it on its front page that Sunday. And we looked specifically at the comments on the electronic version of, and at some point when they got to 180 comments from readers, they stopped it. They said, you know, we can't have more than 180, and 95% of those were positive. They said, these are our brothers and sisters, let's take their hands, let's go forward. That was the gist of that. So that was the first one. Then the presidency, through the spokesperson, said they don't know what this is, and although we sent it to government too, but there are, you know, sometimes it's difficult to get through all the channels. And they said they don't know what this is. They don't think there's a need for a cultural accord. It's already covered in the Constitution. Obviously, that is not what we wanted. So that was sort of dismissive. And then President Mbeki, when he became involved in the election process, campaigning for the ANC, said that this declaration spoke to his heart, and he thought that we should discuss this at a national dialogue process that could follow after the election.
Okay. Doc, again, you know, and thank you very much for that. My interest, again, and I'm sure about, you know, the audience there, the role, your belief with regard to your movement, how do you see, if you are to talk to people broadly, what can they expect as South Africans across color line, the benefit with all what you came up for, if you are to link that with the pledge that you spoke about?
Yeah. Afrikaners are very well organized throughout the country. In almost every small town, perhaps with the exception of KwaZulu-Natal and parts of the Eastern Cape, there are Afrikaners in small towns. They're either business people, or they're lawyers, or they're farmers. And already there's a move in many of these, especially the smaller towns all over the country, for communities to get together across racial lines, and work in their community. I heard the other day that a town like Kroonstad, it was starting to become very dilapidated, now looks quite different. And that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. One of our members, AfriForum, members of the network, have a vast network. The farmers through SAI have a vast network. So we're saying local projects in local communities and local government. Because local government, and this is what we've also heard, we've seen this, but we heard it from the ANC Veterans League in discussions we've had with them, is that local government has failed, mostly. We're not talking the metros. We're talking smaller towns that are really, really going down, and there's no service delivery. And so we think with the expertise of the Afrikaner community, if we could take hands, even with those mostly ANC-led councils, we could even help turn those communities around. And just look at things like maintenance and water and electricity and sewage. So what they can expect is what an organization like AfriForum has already been doing in a number of towns, but just more of it and more widespread.
Oh, okay, okay. No, thank you very much. We are in conversation with Dr. Eloff here today, talking again about the matters that affect our country. But central to all our discussions is the love of our country. How best can we do to hold hands going forward? Doc, thank you very much. We had a discussion with your operations head, Werner Yemen. Again, we were talking about all of these things, and he was saying that in the Eastern Cape, Free State and so on, with taxis, with small farmers and so on. Now, what is it? How do you relate to people? Because there would be those who are keenly interested in working or, establish some relations and contact with yourselves. How do you deal with that in terms of publicizing, marketing yourself? Because there's a service offering. You are ready to assist for the betterment of our country, to move this trajectory.
Yeah. Our timing just before the election was good in that sense that it created that expectation that you're talking about. Obviously, we're now waiting with others to see what the government of national unity will look like. Once that's done, then you can start reaching out. We obviously will reach out to the national government about discussions, and some of it may take place in the national dialogue process and some may be outside that. But then we can say to our member organizations on the ground to say, this is now our time to actively reach out. But I must say, and I think this is sometimes difficult to communicate, although this is not a transactional statement, we also need to know that what we want from government in terms of recognition will also happen. So these two things, I think, the cultural accord and recognition, especially in terms of culture and language, and the offer to help must go together. Someone's put it this way, because people said, but why, is it conditional? And we said, look, if there's a father in Kroonstad, we ask him, he's a member of one of our organizations, we ask him help the ANC-led council with the sewage system there. But don't mind, the school in Kroonstad will be declared English soon. So don't mind that your daughter can't have tuition in Afrikaans anymore. You must forget that, just help. We can't do that. We won't get any traction to do that. So it's not conditional in that sense that we first want the one. We'll go almost in a parallel process, but we must know that there's some bona fides on the side of the government, and perhaps it would be easier, I don't know, depending on the composition of the government of national unity.
The last time I remember, I posed a question to Werner, and I said, in terms of regulating relations, do we, as a form or a channel of communicating with whatever for the betterment of our country, do we rely on government channels or both? I'll tell you why I say that. For an example, communities, there's a possibility, a great possibility where communities basically come together, through their leaders and so on, and they come together. And based on their collective effort, the results are then recognized by government. But sometimes it tends to take a longer period to go to government in order to recognize and legislate before we relate. Sure. I'm saying, what is your attitude towards that?
Look, let's start with an example that has happened, and that is in the little town of Gauteng River, Brits. There was this problem with the water in the town, and Afriforum came in and they sorted it out. They repaired the pumps, and then they had drones who looked at it, and they actually could produce footage to the court that those pumps were sabotaged by local councillors who didn't want the pumps to work because they had the tender for the water tanks. And obviously that's a problem, because we cannot, as a network, or even if in that case it was Afriforum, can't solve that problem. The only people who can solve that problem is the ANC, because they have the councillors. So you need the ANC at a local level also, not just. So, well, I would say that it depends on every community and every community's local circumstances and the local government, but also to distinguish local government from ANC branches in that area. So it doesn't need to wait for a sort of a long line of communication down to the local authority, but I think it does depend on a nod from the national government, the ANC part of it, and the ANC itself to say, we now have this dialogue, not just a dialogue, a partnership with the Afrikaner community. We ask our structures to go ahead. And then obviously the ANC will have to help, because we know this, that there are some people who masquerade as ANC councillors who are actually crooks. They are just there for tenders. and for money, and the ANC will have to take them out. That process will be too long. And I don't mean take them out by killing them. I mean take them out of their position so that the town can start working.
Yeah, no, Doc. You see, I am not going to, I am a product of politics, and today I will avoid the politics and so on.
True.
But the point, Doc, is that whilst you are referring to all of these activities, the question is, there might be people in our societies and the fringes and the outskirts there who say, if they see this podcast and say, how do we get in touch? How do we, for those who do not have the relationship that we seem to be enjoying ourselves, but how do we get in touch so as to be able to, partner and do something for our communities and so on?
The Afrikaner Leadership Network has a website. It is Afrikaner Verklaring with one A. Afrikaner, that A, one A. Verklaring, one word.co.za. So the declaration is there, but there's also a place to ask questions, and we follow up regularly on that. So that's the best way to do it.
Okay.
And then obviously we will refer it to, let's say it comes from the Eastern Cape, we'll see which of our member organizations are working there, and we can do that. I have high hopes that if the government of national unity is composed properly, that there will be a new spirit of cooperation in the country, and this may also give momentum to what we want to do in communities.
Doc, thanks once more. Some few days ago on the newsroom, you made a comment. And with this one, just to follow up on the one that you have just raised now, is that me as an ordinary citizen seated here, we suffered from the load sheddings. Currently, there's a talk about the privatization of water. We talk about the issue of telecom, Eskom, all of these, badly dealt with. You talk about PRASA not working, about SAA, all of these state-owned companies that were functional during the then apartheid era, but functional, the Dinel, the AMSCO, and so on. Now, the history, we might have nice things and nice expectations from this government, but the proof to date, all of that has actually been dealt a blow. What hope do you have that this national government of national unity would make some miracles? The point I'm raising that is precisely because when you look at the GNU, in fact, I don't call it GNU, the coalition basically of the major parties, which is ANC and the DA. But the DA, let me stop there. I'll follow up on the question, is that what hope do you have, given the history that we have seen in our country, and that's something...
Yeah. Let me start by saying I have more hope than I would have had if the coalition, as you call it, would have been with the ANC, the EFF and MK. Because most of the people in MK, and to some extent in the EFF, were the people who caused the demise of all these organizations, state capture and others. The reason I have more hope with the government of national unity, with the DA, the IFP, the Freedom Front Plus, the PA, and even the PAC, I think some of the smaller parties just want to be hangers-on. They'll get some position or so. But my sense is that we need to not only get the Afrikaner community involved, we also need to get business involved. And that the DA would be better placed, better positioned to get business involved. Having said that, with Operation Vulindlela, we've seen progress. Many people say Operation Vulindlela is a project where the business community said we'll help the presidency with 3 projects. The one is on energy, Eskom, logistics or transport, Transnet, and crime. Now, they've made, and I've read reports, I was very skeptical about the fact that we had so little load shedding up to the election and even now. And many of us thought we were just burning diesel again. But in a report that I read that was on Daily Maverick, it was said that it is directly related to the private sector involvement. Now, it's not privatization, it's private sector management that helped the management of Eskom, because I think one of the things that went down the drain in our country is management and oversight. So I'm saying I've got more hope because we may be able to get the business community more involved to do these things, but not necessarily as privatization, just purely management systems and how it works. We'll be able to get the Afrikaner community involved. They would not have been asked. Let's say MK or EFF had been part of that government, they wouldn't have asked the Afrikaner community to become involved. But Julius's view about white people is widely known. So I think one shouldn't always, and the viewers mustn't always, if the private sector is involved, think that it will be privatized. I think, for instance, that you can't privatize water. It's a national resource. You can't privatize that.
But you know that there's a plan around privatization of water.
I would disagree with that.
Okay.
I would rather have water as a national resource managed in a certain sense, in a certain way that is better than today. Look, I've written numerous articles about the fact that what I call the M word is a swear word in South Africa. And M stands for maintenance. We don't maintain. Now we're starting to maintain. 30 years, we've done nothing. Now the maintenance is hugely expensive. So all I'm saying is that I'm not necessarily want to say everything should be privatized, because the moment you privatize, you do make it more difficult for ordinary and poor South Africans to get those services. But there's a way to at least manage natural resources in a private sector way, in a business-like way, that will be better than what we have now.
Doc, can I just 2 steps backwards?
Yes.
I'm a supporter of MK by virtue of my being a former soldier and a former commander in MK.
That's the original MK.
No, even this one.
Okay.
Now, the reason I'm saying that, whilst I'm a staunch supporter of MK now, I have gone out of my way. I've consulted my seniors before. I've gone out of my way to ensure that I get in touch with the Afrikaner community precisely because of their important role in our community. So I don't think it would be correct to say if MK took over, they wouldn't have consulted. We consulted, myself personally, as a staunch member of Umkhonto, supporter, I saw the significance and the role of the Afrikaner community. And we're pursuing those discussions. You seated here is proof to that effect. Okay. So there are a number of other people. Yes, we hear these whites and whatever and so on. I can't talk for EFF. Although I'm not mandated by MK because I'm not an official member, but I'm a staunch supporter. So I'm saying, I just wanted to clarify that. Who said, you see, this is the point, who said, when you are a member of the ANC or DA or you are more South African than others? Who said so? We're all citizens of this country. We might belong to various organizations purely because of understanding and how we perceive the conditions out there. But I'm saying, I wanted that one. When you say EFF or MK, if they were there, they wouldn't have consulted. We consulted ourselves. We have been pursuing relations personally with the Afrikaner community precisely because of their role.
Yeah. Look, I don't know what has been done. What I saw in the news was former President Zuma consulting with Louis Limberg, with a group of his investors who my information is that he forced them to be there. They even called them the Afrikaner Leadership Forum. They don't speak for Afrikaners. So this leadership network that are much more representative of Afrikaners have not been consulted up to today, and perhaps with Werner Riemann. I don't disrespect anyone who belongs to a different party, not at all. But we differ politically. I did see, I must say, somewhere that someone, I don't think it was President Zuma, said that they will not work with the DA, but they will talk to Afrikaners. And that's fine. I mean, I think the traditional link is there. I remember when President Zuma first became president, He had a braai with a lot of rugby people, Victor Matfield and so on. And I think many Afrikaners thought there will be some toenadering, some closeness there, but eventually with state capture and other things, it didn't happen. So all I'm saying is that what we need for the country is delivery and good management. And I think that's scarce in the EFF and MK as it stands.
I have a philosophy based on my experience and so on, is that political organizations in their nature are adversarial.
Absolutely.
They create conflict within and among citizens and so on. So that's my attitude. But unfortunately, the practical reality of our time is that there are organizations, and those are the channels and means for us to be able to communicate. But organizations in their nature, adversarial. But having said that, Doc, without going to what the EFF and everybody else, we might have different political views. But the important central, what drives this agenda is that we have seen what the Afrikaner communities have done. You know, I always say, and I'm very emphatic on, despite the fact that we're anti and against apartheid, but the Afrikaner communities built ESCOM, very firm. The Afrikaner community built ISCO, AMSCO, DINEL, and so on. It was very functional. So in that, for the harmonization of our relations in our country, for the love of our country, it is a critical component part of our society, and hence the discussion, and would continue to do that. But your comment, Doc, with regard to this, what would you want to see, you know, coming out of all of these processes, be it our interaction, but the South Africa at large?
I think better understanding. You know, we talked a lot in the late 80s and the early 90s when we had conflict and we had apartheid. But we stopped talking to each other. I'm talking about not only racial lines, but communities and so on. And we've created these things through social media of this is what a Boer looks like, and this is what a black looks like, and this is what a Zulu looks like. So I would say better understanding by talking to each other. That's the first thing. Secondly, I would see that out of this statement and the accord that we probably, hopefully will get with government, is that the Afrikaner community in all its organizations and localities will become involved in helping to build South Africa together with other communities. Thirdly, obviously the cultural accord with the government, and then something that's been on the agenda, that's been put on the agenda by the Government of National Unity now, is this idea of a national dialogue. Now, what I'm worried about, let me say what I don't want to see. I don't want to see us getting together on a day in September and you have 5,000 delegates from whoever, and they each have 1 minute to speak. And then we've had a national dialogue. I mean, you know, that'll be chaos. It will. So we think, my view is we should almost think about it like the peace process, where we start afresh, and that we have either sectoral or themes, or both. So sectoral would be agriculture, would be one, and then many others, other businesses, NGOs, etc., etc. Themes might be job creation, and it might be that they interlink, and that we then, that there must be a body appointed, it could be by the GNU, of some 30 people across sections of society, across racial lines, but from civil society, so from business, churches, NGOs, and trade unions. And that those themes or sectors or both then have a month to have a 2-day dialogue amongst themselves, because they know each other. They've spoken, they sometimes fight, they sometimes agree. And that you get out of, let's say there are 20 of those, that you get a 4-page summary of the priorities for those themes and sectors. And that goes up to this little secretariat or oversight committee. They work it and they say to each of those themes or sectors, give us 10 people or 20, but not more than that, because otherwise we'll be 500 again or 5,000. And that manageable number of people then get together a month or 6 weeks after that in a 3-day lekgotla. I'm a firm believer, also having been in Dakar, that you must sleep over and you must drink wine or beer and you must get to know each other.
Absolutely.
at least 2 nights sleep over.
No, these formalities, they're very restrictive.
Absolutely.
They confine people.
And then after that, when you bring those 20 themes, the reports of those 20 themes or sectors together, and you discuss it there, you can produce a report for the government of national unity to say, this is what civil society wants. These are our priorities. And I think that, in a sense, would be helpful for the government of national unity, because it will be their agenda, their priority agenda.
Doc, has it ever occurred that the people that we are engaging or that we are talking about, the question of consultation and so on, we tend to be talking, I call them armchair critiques. Because they're educated, they're exposed, you consult those people, you therefore think that you've consulted South Africans. Has it ever occurred to people that if you are to go, whatever that the leadership national level are saying, then you go to specific communities, you might find a completely different complexion.
Yeah.
So I'm bringing this in to say that, yes, there's an introduction of a new concept, national dialogue and so on, but has it ever occurred that if we were to talk about the real dialogue, that would bring long-term stability, solution, and progress, is dependent on how much we are.
Absolutely.
Like, for example, today, if somebody from Katlehong, Vosloorus, wherever, Daveyton, looks at this discussion and say, can I really identify myself with the discussion and the topic? What can I derive out of these things? Because, you see, we tend to be too aloof, too philosophical.
I agree.
Yeah.
I'm always sorry that the government in 1995 abolished the peace committees. They were in every local authority, 243 I think, 257 somewhere there, a peace committee consisting of civil society and the political structures. And they discussed peace, and they also discussed socio-economic projects. And then that was dissolved. If we had that would have been exactly what we need, is to go back to those local communities. And I think we must find a way in these sectors and themes to consult, to have that voice input, because I have that's another discussion, but I have a problem with wokeness and with left-wing people. I'm worried that this whole dialogue could be hijacked by the woke and by the left. And I don't believe that local communities, African, Afrikaans, white, black, are woke or left. We want something delivered on the ground. And I'm so worried that we will go into ideological stuff instead of what's happening on the ground. But thank you very much.
Yeah. I think the last, 2 questions. The first one, Doc, before we finish, maybe I belong to the left, but you see what preoccupies,
I don't think so.
what preoccupies my mind is how best. I've seen mechanisms, I've seen, a number of processes. For an example, in order to ensure that this process is properly secured, no infiltration of people with ulterior motives. What I've seen is that people would starve you, not give you money, because they know that they can manipulate you precisely because you are hungry. Now, all of these things. The question of security, socio-economic and political security. I'm sure I'm not going to be asking that now, Doc, but when we follow up on the discussions, these are some of the things that would want to engage you all.
And that should be part of the national dialogue.
Yeah, exactly. But lastly, Doc, on a lighter note, we understand that you are an avid golf player.
Well, I try very much. Golf, I always say, there are 3 things that keep you very humble. It's farming, it's golf, and it's hunting. Because you think you're good, and then all of a sudden you have a big flop. I'm a 14 handicap at the moment. I'd like to be a 10. I'm working on it, but I enjoy it very much. I'm now semi-retired, so I have some time, but I also build my meetings around my golf. So my wife and family comes first, and then it's golf, and then it's the other thing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, maybe, as we continue, because I'm sure that this, as we said, is part of our agenda, the constant communication would maintain that dialogue, and I'm sure in the process would basically be learning, how to swing.
And thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Doc. And thank you, colleagues. This is the end of our session. And for those who had an opportunity of watching, we are also appearing on TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. Please follow us, the Agenda Podcast, South African Agenda Podcast. Thank you very much. Thanks, Doc.
Thanks.